0. The letter. After having reread the letter for the 5th or 6th time, Dr. Kite leaned back in his chair. Obviously, this was some kind of prank, but who the hell could have sent it? Stevenson had the audacity, but he could barely write up a coherent proposal, and even he wasn't dumb enough to risk a leak by hiring some freelancer for a prank. Maybe some hacker had gotten into the system. There were some crafty sons of bitches out there, but even then, why would they bother contacting him directly? Besides, it's not like what they were doing was that out of the ordinary. People had been working on this type of stuff for decades. Some whimsical little sprite in the back of his mind whispered, what if it's legit, and this guy knows something that you don't? The possibility of an actual breakthrough thrilled him. The boys upstairs would be kissing his boots if he managed to pull it off. He reread the letter an 8th time. The guy specifically said, Strangelet bomb. Dr. Kite's team wasn't trying to build a bomb. Hell, even Strangelets were highly tangential to the work he was doing. But they were tangentially related. Sure, you didn't have to have a real deep understanding of quantum mechanics to connect the dots, but it was an interesting connection to make. Like half a beat too clever to be totally made up. Then again, there were some crafty sons of bitches out there. Whatever the case, he didn't have time to deal with nutcases. He tucked the letter away and forgot about it. The work continued to progress over the following months. In those early days, before Lumen came up with shatter computing, it was all very procedural. The team spent most of their time drafting up AI-assisted programs to run on the colliders whenever those precious spots opened up, with each test unraveling streams of data to feed back into the algorithms in a perpetual cycle of discovery. They'd select the data based on the fields and forces they were trying to manipulate, and the particles did their dance upon the stage, and the audience of scientists would try to interpret that dance. It was what everyone in the field was doing at the time. Standard procedure. Then Eliza caught the inspiration bug. He found her staring at a whiteboard one morning, looking like she'd been up all night. Her husband worked for a pharmaceutical company, so that wasn't uncommon. What was weird was what she'd scribbled up on the board. What's all this? Kite asked, mostly out of courtesy, while he grabbed a cup of coffee. They're functions, she said. He looked at the equations on the board. I can see that. No, she beeped, stabbing the air with a marker. The particles, they're functions. Welcome to Quantum Mechanics 101, he said. Care to elaborate? Don't you see? She said. We've been treating the collider like it's a calculator. We should be treating it like it's a computer. And that was that. It took some time for her to explain the idea, and a little longer to get everyone else on board, but once they'd worked out the intuition, it exploded. They drafted up a model, consulted with a few teams, poached a guy who'd been working on those novelty chemical computers, and they were on their way. After 6 months, it was no longer a mechanical game of call and response between them and the subatomic world. It truly became a dance. It got to a point where it was like the formulas lifted themselves off the page, transcending the ordinary dimensions they'd been confined to and joining with a larger entity. It was a new kind of brain they were creating. They had to designate new symbols, new algebras entirely, to encapsulate the structures that were emerging around them. Variables would sit inside a formula, bouncing around for months like a desiccated bacterium before being fed into the collider to bloom into a glittering cascade of velocities and coefficients on the other side. 2 years passed, and they'd cracked parallel processing. Branches formed in their equations. One calculation's remainder became the modulus of another. Parts of the engine, thought distinct and separate, formed bridges that revealed an elegance that was almost spiritual to behold. After 3 years, the list of potential applications became too vast for them to remain greedy. They unleashed their beautiful monster upon the world, and they became drowned in funding. Half a decade, and they'd cracked the isolation problem. 1 more year, and they had a little baby version of the collider on site to run simpler computations. It was 6 years into the dance, long after Kite's initial ambitions had been realized, that someone said the word Strangelet, and he remembered the letter. It wasn't anything all that groundbreaking, just a paper that happened to cite some of his work on probabilistic phase-amplitude resonance and baryonic quark structure. His team had been fiddling around with manipulating the probability of detecting charm quarks within protons, and apparently another team had built upon that to trigger the formation of other types of quarks in boron plasma. They hadn't quite managed to pop out a strange quark, but apparently that was on the menu. It was on par with a lot of the research that was coming out of Lumen wheel computing. For decades, scientists have been slowly climbing the radioactive ladder of the periodic table in hopes of finding the fabled islands of instability. A lot of the researchers were getting impatient, and the more adventurous among them had been using the new technology in the hopes of finding entirely novel forms of matter lying outside the more familiar protonic elements. It sounded like this team might actually have been getting close. The idea that strange matter could really be dangerous was a controversial one that had been around since forever. Strange matter was theoretically formed by tremendous pressures within high-density stars. Like most forms of exotic matter, it probably wouldn't last long outside of its native environment, but if it could, it was said to be even more stable than everyday matter. A tiny droplet of the stuff, a strangelet, could hypothetically convert other forms of baryonic matter into strange matter just by touching it. The fact that this had not already been observed anywhere in the known universe was reason enough to discount it. It was the same with spontaneous vacuum collapse. Sure, the math said it should be there, but the only real danger was needlessly scaring people off of particle physics. It was bad for funding, not to mention less than ideal for public mental health. This team wasn't actively trying to create strangelets, nor were they worried about accidentally doing so. The only mention of them in the paper was a reference to the potential for metastability. Now that was something worth looking into. Observation was enough to show that the universe wasn't dissolving into hyperdense plasma, but that didn't mean the stuff wasn't stable. Just a year prior, a Swedish team had managed to make a breakthrough with metallic hydrogen. They were decades out from actually cooking up a batch to replace rocket fuel, but the work had been promising enough to set them up with funding for the rest of their careers. This really wasn't much different, and this time Kai might be able to get in on the ground floor. He reread the letter for the first time in almost a decade. It was even more ludicrous with the wisdom of age on his side. Grays. The guy had said grays. As in little green men in flying saucers turning cornfields into modern art. He decided in that moment to throw the letter away, sure then more than ever that it had been a prank. A very clever prank, sure, but obviously a prank. He almost wished he knew who had done it so he could credit them for having been able to spook him at all. He looked up the authors of the paper and gave them a call. Once they heard who was on the other end, it didn't take long before they were in business. 3 years later, Cassius Kite was staring at a canister. Inside was the first and only strangelet in the known universe.